The mountain bike world has been simpering on about the benefits of owning a hardtail mountain bike for many decades. But does that actually apply to an e-mountain bike? And when you're choosing your first bike, should you go hardtail or full suspension? This is a question we'll be exploring in today's video.
Right, so let's kick it off then, Steve. So 5 simple reasons why you should buy an e-mountain bike hardtail.
Oh, okay. I think it's pretty simple, isn't it? I think the first thing is the sheer diversity of bikes and also the price points. Because if you think about it, you can get hub drive bikes from around about £850. Some fantastic examples from Decathlon, from Caliber. They're hub drives, they're hardtail bikes, and they come with a range of motors. But then you've got that price point, and I think you then go up to the more expensive ones, such as
performance off-road bikes.
Performance ones with the with a mid-drive motor, such as this very beautiful looking Canyon at over 3,000.
Shimano EP8 motor on there. Got proper suspension forks, proper off-road tires, hydraulic disc brakes, everything you need for a proper off-road experience.
Absolutely. So I think. So one reason to buy one is that range. So you've got the £850 one, you've got the £3,000 one, but actually there is a lot of stuff in between there. There's a lot of detail in between what we need to talk about, isn't there?
Definitely. Secondly, is the wide range of motors that are available on these bikes. As you mentioned, you've got those hub drive motors, you've got the mid-drive motors, and of course there's different motors within each of those different sectors, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. And thirdly, I think, Chris, maybe arguably the most important one is that you don't actually need to have full suspension because you might ride, forest tracks, you might ride smooth single tracks, and you're not going to venture off-road into very technical, rooty and rocky terrain. So
definitely,
I think if you're riding terrain where you're going to pump the ground, I think a hardtail is a good bike to own, isn't
Definitely. I think even like my local bike park, Windhill, it's a groomed bike park, got big rollers, nice smooth berms, and a hardtail there is an absolute flying machine, even compared to a full suspension bike in some scenarios.
Yeah. The fourth point of why you should possibly think about buying a hardtail e-mountain bike is the fact that they are less maintenance. But only a little bit less maintenance, right?
Yeah, if you think about the different parts, you've got the linkage bearings on all the pivots at the back end, and of course that rear shock. But how much, put your hand on your heart, how much maintenance do you actually do?
Well, I don't know any. And then our fifth point, I think, is the fact that maybe you want your e-mountain bike to be a do-it-all, an all-round bike. You want, may want to do it taking the kids to school, maybe a bit of commuting, a bit of weekend sightseeing.
Just a bit easier to put things like, if you want to put pannier racks on, or rear mud guards,
Has
a trailer.
Does it come to that?
Nearly.
Panniers and rear racks. But you're right though. I mean, people do different types of riding, don't they?
Maybe I think it's sometimes a little less desirable if you were to lock them up in, a bike rack, if you've gone commuting and stuff. Like full suspension bikes are like, wow, but a hardtail sometimes a little less in your face.
Well, you say that, right? So we just saw a character outside here with one of those Van Moof bikes.
Oh, yeah.
So obviously full rigid bike, and do you know what? If you're going to go hardtail, if you're this kind of Puritan that thinks need to when it's simple, just buy a full rigid e-bike like that Van Moof, super stealth, super sleek,
nice
disc brakes. I mean, apparently they're coming out with a new one which has got hub drive front and hub drive rear. But anyway, I'm getting away from the point. So folks, there are 5 good reasons why you might want to consider a hardtail e-bike. Time now then to move on to maybe some of the types, I think, Chris. Because like I said, there's that middle ground there between the 850 bikes and the £3,000 bikes, which we might need to explore in a little bit more detail. Now, the first thing to consider is the rear hub drives, right?
Now, these traditionally come on some of those lower price point bikes, sub £1,000 or around £1,000 to £1,500. But it depends the style of riding you're doing. If you're doing, tame fire roads or soft roading, I like to call it.
Soft roading.
Rather than off-roading, then these could fit the bill.
I think this is my pick. I think this Caliber Kinetic from Go Outdoors, it's just got everything. It's got great geometry, it's got good sizing.
Yep.
Which is really important when you're choosing a hardtail e-bike.
Definitely does tick the box.
And it's it's been built by a company that are mountain bikers, and they know it's a genuinely good all rounder. And I've actually ridden this. I met a guy in the Forest of Dean, and hell of a bike.
Definitely take the strain out of some of those hills as well, wouldn't it?
So next up, where we move from the less expensive hub drive bikes to the slightly more expensive mid-drive bikes. Now, there's a reason that they're more expensive, is that they're a little bit more sophisticated, they're a bit more advanced, aren't they?
A lot more sort of developed software, torque sensors and all that stuff going on.
If you had to put one reason why you'd go for a mid-drive hardtail, I would say more torque to get up the hills.
I would say that, and definitely the balance of the bike. You've got that motor in the middle of the bike rather than that, just hanging in the back of the bike. Any ledge or rock or root is just going to get hung up on all that weight, whereas this bike, with that low-down motor and the battery, the handling is vastly better, isn't it?
Yeah. So, mid-drive bikes, we mentioned the Canyon, beautiful Canyon bike earlier on, but you can actually get less expensive ones. For example, this Decathlon. Now, you saw the Decathlon bikes out at Rockers, did you?
Really impressive, yeah.
Yeah,
Super
and they've just
impressive.
come up with a new range, more updated versions of that.
Brose motors on those.
1,500 quid for a mid-drive hardtail e-bike.
With a Brose motor.
It's the dream, isn't it?
Definitely. Big batteries on those things as well.
It is the dream. Finally, I think we've got the bikes, the hardtail e-bikes, which are a little bit more money. I think the Specialized bike is quite standard, I think. It's got more power, more torque, it's got a bigger battery, super stealth. It is definitely a good all-rounder, isn't it?
I saw one of these out of the Rock, actually, and this thing had trailers on the front. Do you remember the racks all over it as well? It was literally an e-bike SUV, but it had that power to get you, up at the trails at the weekend, or it can be a commuter in the week, or as you mentioned, it's just an all-round tool rather than just a bicycle.
Yeah. So do you think we're actually maybe getting around to answering this question? Why would you buy a hardtail? I think price is one thing, but I think the bigger question is, why would you buy a hardtail over a full suspension bike? Now, Chris, we've spoken about, looked at some of the bikes. We've looked at 5 reasons that you should buy a hardtail e-bike. I think we should now move on to maybe 5 reasons you should not buy a hardtail e-bike.
Definitely.
And I think the biggest question to answer, that needs answering, is why would you buy a hardtail bike over a full suspension one?
Big question.
And I think, if you think about it, that full suspension bike can do everything that the hardtail bike can do. You mentioned, I've heard you mention, that hardtails are lighter weight. They're not, are they?
Not crazily, no.
You can do track stands and all the tricks and stunts on a full suspension bike that you can do.
Yeah, and I think with a full suspension bike, most bikes even have lockout anyway. So if you do want a rigid rear end, just flick that lever on your shock and you've got a hardtail and a flick of a switch.
Yeah, so number 1 is that the full suspension bike can do everything that a hardtail can. Number 2,
harsh ride.
Harsh ride.
Really harsh ride.
I mean, for me, hardtails beat the living daylights out of me simply because I want to go and ride the trails that I ride on my full suspension bike, and it's simply not achievable, is it?
And I find with a full suspension bike, obviously that motor is kind of suspended and the weight attributes to a really good ride, but with a hardtail you haven't got that suspension and that weight is just rattling down between your legs, isn't it? It's like having a sack of potatoes between your legs on a descent.
I think it's exaggerated a little bit. Nevertheless, number 3 on the list is that actually the price. The price of a full suspension e-bike isn't too dissimilar to the price of a hardtail bike.
Yeah, I think even on those higher end e-hardtails, you could potentially get a full suspension e-mountain bike. It'd be less a spec, but the ride quality would potentially be better, right?
Yeah, for sure. Number 4 on the list is the lower end hardtails. I think they've got the componentry are pretty basic, aren't they? I mean, remember we took that bike up Snowdon that time.
Have you recovered from that yet?
I mean, to be honest, the bike did do it. I mean, that was like a 450 quid hardtail. It made it.
It made it up, but what we didn't show was the video of you coming down. Do you remember? I've never seen you look so scared in your life.
This is something you really need to bear in mind, folks, is because in as much as the super cheap, 450 £450 bikes are great, they are very compromised if you take them off-road, so you need to be super careful.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think finally, maybe is if this is going to be your first e-mountain bike, maybe you should consider that riding an e-bike is almost a different sport to a mountain bike. And, have an open mind to think, an e-mountain bike might open doors to different kinds of riding you might not have thought you'd be doing. So you might think, oh, I'm going to get a hardtail and then I'll progress to a full suspension. But I'd pass go, straight to go. What's the word? What's the Monopoly game?
Go straight
to go.
Yeah. I think with the skills that you develop and the amount of riding that you do on an e-mountain bike, you'll quickly surpass what you potentially could do on a mountain bike. And the hardtail will potentially hold you back from learning skills, whereas a full suspension, the door is like wide open and you can just go for it, can't you? Whatever style of riding.
I think our message is, a full suspension e-bike, a little bit more money, but I think in the long run, it's worth it.
Yeah, I think potentially, or you could end up, chucking money at a hardtail for upgrades and bits and pieces, like a better fork, longer travel fork. But if you initially invested that money in a full suspension bike, added a bit more to your budget, then maybe you wouldn't have to do it. But I think it's totally down to where you ride and how you ride, isn't it?
Absolutely.
What you want from your bike.
We're not saying don't buy a hardtail. I think maybe consider spending a bit more money on a full suspension.
I think if you're asking that question yourself, do I want a full suspension or a hardtail? Definitely need to take into all these aspects of the vid that we've talked about today. So let us know down in the comments box down below about why you went for a full suspension bike over a hardtail, or did you go the other way, a hardtail over a full suspension? Any questions, get involved in the comments box too. Give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Make sure you subscribe to us here on eMBN, and we shall see you in the next one.